Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Let's start with the big strategic storyline. Washington and Beijing are setting up for what could be a pretty consequential meeting later this month between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The working dates floating around right now are March 31st through April 2nd, with the location expected to be Beijing. Now, here's the thing. Expectations for this summit are, let's call them carefully managed. Nobody on either side seems to think this is going to be some cinematic Cold War ends with a handshake moment. Think less Rocky Balboa in the final round and more two heavyweights circling the ring, making sure nobody throws the first punch. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said over the weekend that dialogue between the U.S. and China is essential to prevent what he called misunderstandings and misjudgments. That's diplomatic language for things could spiral if these two countries stop talking to each other. And the backdrop here is important. This conversation is happening while the U.S.-Israel war against Iran is in its second week, which has already killed more than 1,300 people in Iran and reportedly resulted in the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So while Washington and Beijing are trying to keep their relationship stable, there's a major conflict burning in the Middle East that could drag in energy markets, regional alliances, and great power politics. China has publicly condemned the use of force and called for a halt to military operations, but Beijing hasn't gone much further than that, which is notable because Iran has been one of China's more important strategic partners over the years. But when the U.S. military starts moving at scale, even Beijing tends to tread a little carefully. History lesson there. China hasn't directly confronted the U.S. militarily since the Korean War days, and that was a very different world. Now, one of the possible deliverables from the Trump-Xi meeting is actually pretty interesting from an economic standpoint. There's been talk of China purchasing around 500 narrow-body aircraft from Boeing. That's a massive deal, potentially worth tens of billions of dollars, although deliveries would stretch well into the 2030s because Boeing's production lines are already jam-packed. But negotiations are complicated. China wants guarantees that it will keep receiving spare parts and components over the long term. Washington, meanwhile, is juggling tariffs, export controls, and rare earth supply issues. Basically, the economic relationship between these two countries right now is like a long-term couple that's still together, but arguing about the thermostat every day. And speaking of friction between Washington and Beijing, the broader geopolitical environment is getting interesting in the Western Hemisphere as well. The Trump administration has been leaning hard into what some analysts are calling a Donroe Doctrine, basically a modern version of the Monroe Doctrine, asserting U.S. influence across the Americas. Earlier this year, the U.S. authorized the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, and Washington has also made threats about potential military action against Colombia and Mexico, while suggesting Cuba's communist regime could collapse. All of that indirectly pressures China, which has built economic and political relationships across Latin America through its Belt and Road Initiative. So you've got this big strategic competition happening, but both sides still want to keep the temperature below boiling. Now let's shift gears to something happening inside China that's honestly pretty remarkable. Xi Jinping is dealing with a massive leadership shakeup inside the People's Liberation Army. Over the past 2.5 years, anti-corruption investigations have taken down more than 75 senior military officers and defense industry executives. And in January, Xi removed his own top military deputy, General Zhang Youxia, who was one of the most powerful uniformed officers in the country. If you're thinking, that sounds like a lot of generals getting fired, you're absolutely right. At this point, 5 of the 6 uniformed officers who once served under Xi on China's Central Military Commission have been removed, investigated, or pushed aside. That's basically the equivalent of half the Pentagon's senior leadership disappearing in a couple of years. Now, officially, this is all about rooting out corruption. And corruption has definitely been a problem inside the PLA for decades. Arms procurement, promotions, logistics contracts, you name it. But there's also a political element here. Xi has made it clear that loyalty to the Communist Party comes first, and he told military delegates recently that there must be no room for disloyal people in the armed forces. The result is a military leadership structure that's, let's say, a bit thin right now. Some senior posts are being filled temporarily by lower-ranking officers while investigations continue, which is not exactly ideal when you're trying to run a 2 million-person military and modernize it to compete with the United States. Meanwhile, China is still keeping up military pressure around Taiwan. Over the past day, 8 Chinese naval vessels were detected operating around the island. Taiwan responded by launching combat air patrol aircraft, sending out naval ships, and activating coastal missile systems to monitor the situation. This kind of activity has become routine. China's approach is often described as gray zone pressure, basically using ships, aircraft, and Coast Guard units to apply constant pressure without crossing the line into open war. Now, another interesting diplomatic wrinkle popped up over the weekend involving Japan and Taiwan. Taiwan's premier, Cho Jung-tai, traveled to Japan to watch Taiwan play in the World Baseball Classic. On the surface, that sounds like a perfectly normal sports trip, right? Except it appears to be the first time a Taiwanese premier has visited Japan since 1972, when Tokyo and Taipei broke formal diplomatic relations. Beijing was not thrilled. Chinese officials accused Cho of pursuing what they called provocations related to Taiwanese independence and warned that Japan would have to bear consequences for allowing the visit. Japanese officials, for their part, said it was a private trip and that Cho didn't meet with government officials, which is classic diplomatic theater. Everyone insists nothing happened, while everyone else absolutely knows something happened. Down in the South China Sea, tensions are bubbling again between China and the Philippines. Philippine officials say a suspected spy may have leaked sensitive information about supply missions to the military outpost at 2nd Thomas Shoal, where Filipino troops are stationed aboard the grounded ship BRP Sierra Madre. According to Philippine authorities, someone with access to operational details may have passed information to Chinese contacts, allowing Chinese maritime forces to anticipate and block resupply missions. The Philippines has also uncovered what it says is a broader network in which Chinese nationals recruited Filipinos working in defense and security agencies through consulting arrangements. China denies all of it, of course, calling the accusations malicious smears, which is pretty much the standard script whenever espionage allegations pop up. And speaking of espionage, there's a case unfolding in Australia involving a businessman named Alexander Sergo, who allegedly prepared analytical reports for individuals believed to be connected to China's Ministry of State Security. According to prosecutors, Sergo met these contacts in Shanghai after being approached through LinkedIn, because apparently LinkedIn has quietly become one of the world's most underrated intelligence recruitment platforms. The reports he produced allegedly covered things like lithium supply chains, defense policy, AUKUS, the Quad Alliance, and iron ore exports. Sergo says the material was all open source and denies providing any classified information. The trial is still ongoing. Meanwhile, inside China, authorities are pushing a nationwide campaign reminding citizens that protecting state secrets is everyone's responsibility. The Ministry of State Security recently released guidance warning researchers, engineers, and defense workers not to copy or share sensitive information and to be extremely careful with digital data. In other words, Beijing is worried about leaks and possibly worried that foreign intelligence agencies are poking around. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.